What's up, guys? Welcome to another special episode of the Young Guns podcast. I forgot our name for a second there. Um, uh, this video is sponsored by Bet99. If you like fantasy hockey, football, or other casino games, please sign up to Bet99. The link is in the description below, and you could use our code, which is Young Guns, all in lowercase letters, one at the end. You must be 19 years old or up to and please play responsibly. And this video is also sponsored by the Mind Foundation Canada. They raise funds and awareness to find cures for neurological disease and disorders. They're currently focused on mental health. Their website is in the description as well, and you can check them out to donate. So, guys, with that being said, we have a special guest. We have Sammy Silber of the Washington Hockey Now to talk some Washington Capitals hockey. A lot of news surrounding this team in the offseason with injuries, acquisitions, and high expectations. Obviously, with that being said, thank you so much for coming on today, Sammy. We appreciate it.
No, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm pumped. So excited.
So let's get into the biggest topic of this summer, which is the Nicklas Backstrom hip injury and surgery that most likely makes him unavailable for this season. So, obviously, a lot of Washington Capital fans were, not too happy with that news because they have a short window in terms of winning the Stanley Cup again with Alexander Ovechkin, being up there in age, John Carlson, and, not and TG Oshie as well. And a lot of injuries plagued this team in the first round of the playoffs against the Florida Panthers that unfortunately will affect them at the start of the upcoming season.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think personally, you look at where the Caps are at and kind of even in terms of Backstrom and stuff, like he was a guy that I think ended the season and there was a lot of uncertainty about whether he would play again and stuff. There was a lot of talk about even with the GM that he was going to go and get surgery. And I think for the Caps, kind of losing Backstrom, or it looks like at least he's going to be out for the season, unless he somehow magically comes back. But to me, I think losing Backstrom is a big blow for them, especially since we've all seen the chemistry with him and Ovechkin over the years, and kind of how much success Ovi's had with Backstrom next to him. And I think the Caps are a better team when he's in the lineup, right? But I think the Caps have done a decent job in the offseason, kind of filling that void. Obviously, you can't replace Nicklas Backstrom; it's kind of hard to do that. But they've added some guys that I think can definitely help mend that loss a little bit better. And I think they're a team that has underachieved in the last couple of years, I would say, in terms of where their expectations are. I think from the outside world, I don't know necessarily from Washington fans, but I know that from the outside world, they're an expectation of like they need to make the playoffs, they need to be contenders, and I think they haven't necessarily shown that over the years, over the last couple of years, especially in the series against the Bruins. They were a team that I thought played well. I don't think they were necessarily that bad, but it showed that they weren't maybe on the same wavelength as them. And so I think that it's going to, kind of continue to show that. I think goaltending played a big role in them last year too. And obviously they moved Vanecek. But just going back to Backstrom, I think it's a big loss for the Caps, but I think they've done a good job at addressing that this offseason, at least just in my opinion. Sammy?
Yeah, no, I was waiting for you guys to be like, also, I'm going to put on a hat just because, like, my hair is like being terrible. I hope that's okay.
It's totally fine.
No, yeah. I mean, the Backstrom injury news, I mean, is devastating on a number of levels for the team. I mean, you look at a guy who, not only makes a huge impact offensively, but is just like a staple of the franchise, a vocal leader, somebody who's, absolutely loved and adored in the locker room. And I think that losing Backstrom, I mean, like you said, is going to be a huge void to fill. But over the offseason there, you point out there were moves made, and I think the acquisition of Dylan Strome is kind of going to help fill that void. Nobody can fill Nicklas Backstrom's void. It's just not, you know what I mean? Like, even, the Caps weren't getting a $9 million player. And Backstrom, he, there's been rumblings that, like, he wants to come back this season, wants to come back at some point. It's looking less likely just based on the recovery time and the rehab ahead of him and the risks involved. But I think that the acquisition of Strome is something that will help. The resurgence of Evgeny Kuznetsov definitely helps with that top six void, that power play, what are we going to do without Backstrom? Thankfully, Kuzi can pick up some of that void. And then we get to see what Dylan Strome does. And then, of course, we have Connor McMichael and Lapierre and a bunch of prospects who are also competing. So I think there's a lot of things to look forward to there.
What worries me actually about Backstrom is the surgery that he got ends careers. Like no player has really played the same coming back from that. So even if he does come back, like I don't see him being the old regular Backstrom at all. And as for Dylan Strome as a replacement, that's kind of far fetched. I mean, yeah, change of scenery, but we heard that when he went to Chicago, and nothing really panned out.
Just for a little bit, and then he went back to
And then he went back. Then he went back to his regular self. I guess he got the high from switching and going to a bigger franchise, and like he went back down. So I see him and Lars Eller maybe alternating between third and second. I don't see there maybe being a distinct second line guy. And a lot of people are saying, with Wilson on IR, which is also another player that that's going to be tough to replace. Maybe they could afford someone throughout the year, and I think that would be a bad move as well, because if ever they do come back, both players, I mean, they're gonna have to move someone, and to give someone up for nothing nowadays, it's they're in a tough situation with the injuries that are going on right now.
There's a lot of responsibility on Strome, hopefully finding his place on the Washington Capitals roster, hoping that he could become the player that they hoped to get when Arizona drafted him so high in his respective draft year. And sorry, Luca.
I just think we're talking about without talking about Dylan Strome, but I think we're talking about how he underachieved in Chicago. And yeah, I don't think he was necessarily great, but if you look at the last 3 seasons, even the 4 seasons that he was in Chicago, I mean, he had 51 points in 58 games in 18-19 after being traded from Arizona. Then, 19-20, he has 38 points in 58 games. Okay, not the best, but not horrible. Obviously, 2020, 2021, he had 40 games played, 17 points. Not the best year of his career. But then this year, 69 games played, 22 goals, 26 assists, 48 points. He's a guy who puts up points. And I think for the Caps, this is a guy that you're paying $3.5 million. It's a 1-year deal. It's a contract that, there's no risk involved to this whatsoever for them because, again, Backstrom likely doesn't play this season. So you have a guy that's 25 years old, scored 22 goals last year on a team that, wasn't the best, one of the worst teams in the NHL, right? Obviously, he played alongside Patrick Kane. But if you throw Dylan Strome on, that top 6, even with a guy like Tom Wilson or a guy like Alex Ovechkin even, and you give Dylan Strome, a scorer like Alex Ovechkin, he's going to put up points. And I think it's just really that simple. And so I do think he finds his game in Washington. I don't think Dylan Strome's that bad of a hockey player, and I think we're kind of undervaluing that because I think he's proven that he can be. I just think he needs to find a spot where he's able to stick. And I think that in Chicago, especially the last 2 years, there was a lot of issues with coaching and stuff. He was a healthy scratch too at times, but he's not a bad hockey player. And I think that under the circumstance that Washington is in at the moment, I think the best move for them is to throw him in the top 6 and just kind of see if he can generate some type of chemistry with Ovechkin, even if we know that Ovechkin already has chemistry with Kuznetsov. But, the Caps have a solid top 6. They have a solid forward core. I don't see this team as necessarily in a desperate need of being like, oh, my God, we don't have Nicklas Backstrom. We need to go address a second-line center. I think they have it in Dylan Strome. I just think the expectation is that he lives up to that expectation of being that second-line center. And then the Caps don't have to necessarily worry about Backstrom either, and they can address their needs in other areas that are maybe more, more in need, I would say. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, just going off of that, I mean, exactly like you said, it's a low risk, potentially high reward deal, right? I mean,
yeah.
You're looking at a guy who, like you said, I mean, with Chicago, his numbers aren't anything terrible. They're not, I mean, there are a couple things he could maybe do better. There's some parts of his game he needs to polish up, and he needs to be able to have that consistency. Like you said earlier, Chris, that made him the 3rd overall pick in 2015. There's a reason he went that high. He's
Yeah.
only 25 years old. We're not talking about like a 34-year-old guy who's past his prime and never able to recapture the younger parts of his game ever again. So there's still upside there, and like you said, it's a good top six, and there's always the opportunity to move around lines, and if he doesn't have chemistry with one guy, maybe he'll have it with another. I know Lars Eller and Anthony Mantha really clicked last year, and it's just because of experimenting with the combos, and just moving things around. And I think if you give him like an Oshie, somebody who can be a mentor, a leader, bring that speed and energy, that's really going to help him. Maybe I don't see the Caps personally breaking up that first line with Ovi and Kuznetsov just because of the star power and dynamic there. But, you put him on the power play, you see what damage he can do. It's all about experimenting, right? And that's really what the training camp window is for. So I think there's a lot to look forward to. And like you said, I mean, it's not any high risk. There was no room to really bring in a $9 million player. It would have led to a salary dump situation, which, like you said earlier, nobody wants to trade anything away for nothing. And, there's not enough LTIR space. You can say that makes enough space until you're, blue in the face, but it doesn't always make that room that you're looking for, especially in the long run when those players come back. So I think that Caps fans are going to like what he brings. He plays with speed. He has creativity, and I think Caps fans have to look forward to that.
And another guy that they brought in, which I'm surprised they got him for so cheap, a second round pick, was Conor Brown. A guy that, really, stepped up on the Ottawa Senators the last couple of years. And if I'm mistaken, last year was a career year for him. Or was that 2 years ago? I'm not too sure with that.
It was
Very underrated.
He had the last 3 years in Ottawa were probably his best seasons in the NHL.
Yeah. So obviously this guy's been picking up the last couple of years. We all know that Ottawa, in terms of, trying to, rebuild, he was one of those pieces that, was he going to be part of the rebuild, or was he going to be traded ultimately? And ultimately he was moved to clear up some cap space, probably make some room for some younger players. But the Capitals get him for only giving away a second round pick. And I would assume that he will play on the first line, taking over Tom Wilson for the time being. So having Ovechkin, Kuznetsov, and Connor Brown as a first line, I think that's going to be fantastic for Capitals fans to look forward to this year.
Well, I think there's that, but I think the other thing is too, right? The Caps, like we mentioned before, they're a stacked top six, and obviously we haven't even included Tom Wilson, I think, who's out till December, if I'm not mistaken. At least that's what I read. So they're going to be missing Tom Wilson for a while. But even if you look at that, like Sammy said before, they can play around with the lines and kind of, figure out what works and what doesn't. But Connor Brown is one of the most underrated pickups, I think, of this offseason. He was a guy that, when he got traded to Ottawa, there was a lot of surprise, at least on my part, that he did get traded. I know the Sens were trying to move some cap space a little bit too, but for a second round pick, I think the Caps did a very good job acquiring a guy like him. And he's a good penalty killer. He's a good shutdown guy. I think as a third liner, ideally is where I think he'll play once Wilson comes back. I think as a third line shutdown role for the Caps, he can be super, super effective. He's on a cost effective deal at $3.6 million as well. And I think they did a really good job with that signing. And I think just those two acquisitions, and we haven't even got to the other ones that they've made, I think those are two acquisitions that kind of went under the radar this offseason and maybe weren't talked about enough as much as they should be, because, like I said, you're not gonna be able to replace Nicklas Backstrom as a whole, right? You're gonna have to replace him by committee. And I think they've added the pieces that they need to kind of replace that player in different areas, right? So you have the Connor Brown, who's more of the defensively minded, who can score shorthanded and put points up when he needs to. But you've also got Dylan Strome, who has something to prove after, a season where he was having ups and downs, right? So
we're missing another guy. They brought back Marcus Johansen, who originally they weren't planning to re-sign, who could play center and also the wing. So in terms of center depth, I think they're fine. You have Kuznetsov, Strome, Eller, Dowd, and Johansen, who could potentially be a center option as well. So, that's 5 centers right there. So, if it doesn't work out for Dowd, let's say, and they put Johansen on the fourth line, that's possible, but I don't see that happening. For me, what I see essentially is that if Strom is not working out as a center, Eller moves to the second line, and Johansen takes over third line duties as a center, and Strom is moved to the wing. That's what I assume what the plan B is in terms of if it doesn't work out for Strome. But Strome's gonna be surrounded, like you guys were saying before, with a lot of offensively minded players, talented players, elite franchise, whatever terminology you want to use to describe these players in the top six, and that's something that Strome, didn't necessarily have in Chicago for the long term. Taves was out for a year. Kane was always paired up with the Brinkat for the most part. Chicago was not the same dynasty they were in the 2010s. So it's only normal that Strome, maybe this change of scenery essentially helps him out right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, like you said, I mean, there's options if it doesn't work out, right? I mean, I think that with the center situation, the Caps really want to look this season to use Connor McMichael more down the middle. He played a lot of wing minutes last season, probably primarily on the wing. I think he only got a couple games at the center position, mainly a left wing. But something that McCullen said at the end of the season is that we want to see him in the center role. We think he'll thrive better as a center. I personally agree. That's where he's played most of his career, coming up from juniors, AHL. That's where he's thrived. So I think that's their option if Strome doesn't work out, is seeing McMichael take on more of that center ice time. Just because, especially if Hagelin doesn't return, then I see Johansen. I think earlier this past season he told us Johansen was good. So I'll use Johan. He was like either or. I'm like, we were like, it's your name, dude. I'm like, tell us, you know what I mean? It's okay, like whatever you prefer. But he wasn't bad in the wing position. And I think that he would also be a really good fit on that fourth line with Dowden Hathaway. It's an absolute powerhouse, and you see a defensive minded forward like Johansen, you're gonna throw him in there. So I think that there's a lot of options there. And circling back to Conor Brown, I mean, yeah, they got an absolute steal of a forward right there. He's coming off a really, really good year, capable 20-goal scorer, knows how to get to those dangerous areas, but also he's an excellent penalty killer. And he's incredibly happy about doing it. And when you're missing Wilson, you're missing Backstrom, and you're missing Hagelin potentially, you need somebody to come in and step up and be on that PK. And so Conor Brown is somebody who really does it all. He can play those top 6 minutes. He can kill those penalties. He's an incredibly, good work ethic, good drive, good personality. And I think that's something that you really, really, really need. Also, sorry about this one. I just up and down because she has figured out how to open the garbage can. That's her activity. So I keep racing back to shut the garbage can. So I apologize.
Totally understandable. My dog made an appearance. Chris's dog has made an appearance. We got a lot of love from the viewers. So I think it's totally understandable. But let's talk about something that obviously surprised a lot of people, which is the whole goalie tandem change. You have Ilya Samsonov and Vitek Vanecek, for the last couple of years, and then there was this whole debate who is going to be the starting goaltender in the long term. Neither or. They completely get rid of their whole goalie tandem, bring in Darcy Kuemper, Stanley Cup winner with the Colorado Avalanche, and Charlie Lindgren, a guy who showed a lot of promise last year with the St. Louis Blues, especially in the AHL as well. So, giving him a shot as a backup goalie, that has a risk factor in terms of high reward, but low risk as well. So, can you please tell us what exactly transpired in terms of those events?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think it was a shock to quite a few people. It was clear after the season that something was going to change, right? I mean, you had over the past 2 years they had been working with Vanecek and Samsonov, forming this 1A 1B tandem, hoping that one of them would take the reins. And you've had stretches where Vanecek was unstoppable, in excellent form. And then, there was a complete drop. And then they switched to Samsonov, a couple of really good games, looks red hot, drops off. And you're going back and forth, back and forth. And, we also saw in the Stanley Cup playoffs, which is not an ideal time, for that. You know what I mean? I mean, teams run with 2 goalies. It happens, but that's not by any means ideal. So, over the offseason, both were restricted free agents. Both were RFAs. So they both needed new deals. And what was mainly figured is that one of them would be moved and the other one would stay, get the extension, and be, the backup, or one be with, the big name goaltender who was bought in. I think it was clear that the Caps wanted a starter, and that's what they were going to do. At the draft, they were talking about both. They were, garnering interest on both, having those conversations. Ultimately, Vanecek was the one to go. You asked McClellan if he prioritized one over the other. No, it was both. What's the best offer? Okay, we get a high second round pick and we get to take Chesley, whose potential is a first round pick. And then we got another one. Fine. We'll send you, we will send you Vanecek. Here you go. And that's what happened there. And then I think the Caps also were looking, mainly what McClellan and the team was looking at was, arbitration. And Georgiev, when he signed with the Avalanche, that kind of set the precedent for the price of a backup. And so they looked ahead to arbitration, and they, as my dog goes back to the trash can, I'll keep talking. As we figured and as we saw, I'm just going to move it. I'm so sorry.
It's totally fine.
Okay. Stop wagging your tail. I don't know why you're happy. Like I have no idea.
The video.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, why don't you go in the other room? Okay. All right. Problem solved. Okay, sorry. Anyway, so what she'll open the door, don't worry. So what happened basically was they looked at that arbitration case, right? And they saw, like, okay, if he can go as high as, $3 million plus, and he's going to be a backup, we don't want to pay that much for a backup. We can go to the market and we can get a high caliber star and a backup for, less expensive. And it was looking ahead to that. And given Samsonov's, inconsistency, he just hasn't been able to work out with the Caps. It was a long trial, and they said, you know what, we're not going to qualify you. We're going to avoid this whole arbitration thing down the road. Those conversations haven't started, but it was kind of crossing the bridge before they get there. And that's essentially what happened there. And I think they got two, really good options, right? I think that Kuemper has been one of the most consistent goaltenders, over the past 5 seasons. I think his 0.921, sorry, it's been a day. 0.921 save percentage over the last 5 seasons leads all goaltenders who played at least 150 games. So as a starter who's gaining a lot of minutes, he has a very high save percentage, a lot of consistency. He's coming off a Stanley Cup. He's coming off a career year. And he's a proven starter, and he's a leader. And I think that's something that they need. And then Lindgren, like you said, I mean, he was absolutely fantastic last season, not just at the, NHL level, but his AHL numbers were great too. And I think the Caps got him for a good price in 3 years to see how he develops with Kuemper. I think there's a lot to be excited about between the pipes.
Were you shocked? Yeah, sorry, you go ahead, Luca.
And I think one of the things too with the Caps, right? And I was very surprised because I'm a big Vanecek fan. I really like Vitek Vanecek. I think he's a really good goalie, and I don't think that not that he wasn't given an opportunity in Washington, but I don't think it was the right place for him. Just in terms of like the system and kind of where everything was, and I think he needed to change the scenery, and I think he's going to get that opportunity in New Jersey. But I was honestly surprised that they got rid of both. I think it was more of a situation where it was like, you know what? Kind of like you said, they're going to keep one and trade the other, right? And so they end up going in a direction where they're like, okay, we ended up trading Vanecek, and we ended up not even qualifying Samsonov, and we let him walk, right? And so I like the move of Kuemper. I think the term was a little bit too much. Obviously, for a starting goalie, you have to pay for a starting goalie, but 5 years at 32 years old, obviously he's been consistent and stuff too, and he's won a Stanley Cup. I think it's a little bit too much term-wise. I think the money's okay, just the term's a bit high. And I think with Charlie Lindgren, it's a little bit of not a surprise in the sense that I think he deserves an NHL job. I think, like you said, his AHL numbers and his NHL numbers last year were good, and I don't think his NHL numbers are that bad career-wise either. I think in Montreal it wasn't a good place for him, just in terms of the depth chart and kind of where the goaltending was at that point either. But he got an opportunity in St. Louis last year, and he ended up seizing in, and he did really well. I think he's going to do well in Washington under a backup role, but I like the goaltending in Washington. I think one of the issues that they've had over the last couple of years, and obviously you mentioned it before, you can't go into the playoffs with two. You can go into the playoffs with two goaltenders, but the whole point of going into the playoffs is not to play both goaltenders. It's to have one guy that's going to be your ride or die guy and have your backup kind of be there if something drastic were to happen to your starting goalie. And I think with the Caps, they kind of went into their playoffs like seasons with no real starting goalie, and they're like, we're going to start one or the other, and we're just going to take it game by game. And I don't think that it was necessarily the right approach to that, right? And I think with Kuemper, you saw what he did in Colorado last year. Obviously, his playoff numbers are not fantastic, but they're he did win a Stanley Cup at the end of the day. And I think that goes a long way. And like you said, he's a consistent goaltender, and I think he's going to help Washington goaltending wise too. And I think you've got yourself a legitimate starter. This is a guy that's going to play 50, 60 games in a year. This is a guy that will, take the heavy workload that, Samsonov and Vanecek weren't necessarily able to take on their own. And so I think that that's going to be important. I think also the consistency factor, the fact that he's a guy, like you said, who's led save percentage in the last 5 years too, of having 0.921. He's been consistently good as well. And I think if Kuemper can maintain that consistency in Washington over the next 5 years or even over the next 3 years, then this team has a chance to potentially compete for another Stanley Cup, at least one more before they have to tear it apart and restart all over. Because at some point, this team's going to have to go into a rebuild. Once Alex Ovechkin calls it quits.
That's exactly what I was going to say. This team will not rebuild. We did a video on it as well. Retool or rebuild. This team obviously chose to retool instead of rebuild. They're not gonna, tear down, their team until Ovechkin essentially retires. And obviously, he has a goal in mind, and that's to beat Wayne Gretzky's all-time scoring title. So I mean, I would predict that he will do it. Especially for his age, for the level of production he's been able to do these last couple of seasons, very impressive for his age. And I think he's just gonna continue going at it, and he's a very driven player. We all know that, and he's, in my opinion, the best goal scorer of all time in terms of hockey, of course. So in terms of the goalie situation, I thought Charlie Lindgren was going to get re-signed with the St. Louis Blues, become the backup since Husso got traded to Detroit. But then that was not the case. Joel Hofer becomes the backup. Lindgren goes to the Capitals, and I'm like, holy crap! They're really giving him an opportunity here. So they really have a lot of faith in him. And I was joking around with the guys when we found out that they got rid of their whole goalie tandem. I'm like, they're gonna sign Darcy Kuemper because there was a lot of rumors before the free agency that he was linked there, and I'm like, I wouldn't be surprised if Lindgren's the backup goalie, and that's what happened after. I'm like, wow, our first one of our few times that we actually called something, so we took credit for that.
Insider information.
But Chris, what were your thoughts essentially when they just got rid of their whole goalie tandem and they decided to go with two new goalies?
I mean, listen. I mean, shock. I'm more of a Samsonov kind of, fan. So I mean, I wasn't surprised that Vanecek left. But when I saw Samsonov leave, like, I figured they would at least keep one of them just in case rebuild comes once in one day. They would have at least somewhat of a young goalie that they could have, to fall back on. But I guess, they went full on. We're going to have to, compete. We're going to go with someone who's more consistent, has a ring, even though, they didn't really win because of him. And I think they're gonna make it. And listen, Charlie Lindgren's, I think he's a fantastic goalie, very underrated. Montreal, I mean, when you have Carey Price to compete with, I mean, listen, the comments are gonna be there, right? People are gonna hate if you're not winning games. But in St. Louis, I think he played fantastic. AHL, like you guys mentioned, his numbers are ridiculous. Well, not ridiculous, but they're decent. I think he's a pretty good backup. I mean, listen, it's an upgrade, sure. Long term, I think it's not the best. I mean, I think I would have stuck around with maybe the younger guys. But yeah, I mean, listen, their defense. They also lost Schultz, I think, I believe.
Yeah.
So and goaltending is what was hurting them last season. So now that they got somewhat more stable, I mean, maybe they could win some more games.
And that's our next topic, which is the defense. They have Ferrari right now. They have Carlson, Orlov, Jensen, Gustafson, and Van Riensdijk. When I look at this team, I just feel like this is way too much responsibility on Carlson and Orlov. And I would have felt that maybe they would be in the market to acquire another top four defenseman to help out with that. Because bringing in, Erik Gustafson, we've seen him on the Montreal Canadiens, we've seen him on the Chicago Blackhawks, and on other teams as well. And his offensive game is, pretty impressive, to be honest. But in terms of his defensive game, it's terrible in my opinion. There's nothing great about that. So
Yeah, what's scary is they're all on expiring contracts too. Well, except for Carlson, but all of them are on expiring contracts.
So, what are your thoughts, Sammy, on their defensive core? Do they need to add to that? Who stays? Is there a guy maybe like Chelsea who they've drafted that they have high hopes for that could potentially make this team within the next couple of years? What are your thoughts on this whole situation?
Yeah, I mean the something about the Caps that they've done really well over the last few drafts really is they've taken a lot of defense, and they've really stacked up their depth rather on the blue line. They have great options. They have Iorio back there. Alexiev is still waiting for his chance. Like you said, Chesley, he was a huge pickup, because he was potentially a first round pick, and then just weighing, and the Caps called him. So again, I mean, there's a lot of options, and Lucas Johansen is somebody who I actually think will get his chance this year. I really do. I think he's developed great over his years in Hershey, and he's going to come up, and he looked great in his debut. So I think that they really want to see more from him this season. As for the top four, I mean, you look at guys, not just Orlov and Carlson, who, Carlson can put up points, but there's also been, he struggles in his own end, at times. And, it's great to have a 70-point defenseman, but you also need, shutdown play in your own end. And that's something that Faravari, I think, stepped up and was excellent with. He has great strength. He's physical. He was making those hard hits. He was staying back. He was hard to stack up against. He's a phenomenal skater. He's only like 22. So seeing that, I mean, I think he complimented Carlson fantastic on that top pairing. I think Laviolette and McClellan really like the young guy on there. He's entering his sophomore season. I gave him a Calder vote. I thought he was excellent. And so you look at that, and I think the Caps don't want to change anything there. And then, same thing can be said for Jensen. He was excellent with Orlov. Great right-hand defenseman. He was moving the puck. I think he had a career year in points. It wasn't a lot of points, but that's not primarily what he does, but he was moving the puck. He was showing off the hands. He was speedy. He was quick. He was hard to stack up against. He was in the right position. He wasn't missing assignments. That's something that you want from a top four defenseman, and he looked good. And him and Orlov really formed that shutdown pairing. You got that offensive firepower from Carlson, and you got that, game from Faravari that complemented his, but then you had a shutdown pairing with two experienced defensemen. So I think looking at that top four and seeing how it worked, it was kind of it's not broken, let's not fix it. And then when you look at the third pairing, Schultz left, and that's taking, a puck mover out, but it does give the opportunity for TVR, who I think is incredibly underrated, and he's been an excellent X factor, the chance. And then we'll see all these left-hand D. It's Gustafson. They re-signed Irwin. They have Lucas Johansen waiting for his chance, and you got Gabriel Carlson, who's 6'5", and still wants to prove he belongs in the IHL lineup. So you got options.
One of my biggest concerns, and obviously it has nothing to do with this season, but kind of going into next season, the Caps have a lot of unrestricted free agents and kind of a lot of people to sign next year. If you look at their decor, they're only committed to John Carlson long term. Orlov's up next year, Jensen's up next year, TVR's up next year, right? Everybody on their decor apart from Carlson is up next year, and I find that very interesting because I think it's kind of more of like a prove it deal where it's like maybe they look at this and go, okay, let's kind of see how this decor does this season, with these guys and see which ones we want to bring back. Obviously, I think Dmitry Orlov ends up staying in the near future as well, Jensen as well. But, guys like Trevor Van Riemsdyk, guys like Erik Gustafson, even guys like Matt Irwin, for example, these are guys that are kind of going into the season to kind of prove their worth, right? And they're kind of proving that they're capable of, potentially earning an extension with this team beyond this season. And I'm a big fan of Martin Ferravari as well. I think this guy's been great for the team, all year. Last year he was fantastic for Washington in the games that he played, and I think he's going to be a guy that is going to end up becoming, if not already, a top 4 defenseman and a stay-at-home top 4 defenseman for a long time. So I like the Caps decor a little bit. I just don't like the fact that they're not committed to anybody long-term except for Karlsson. But, this is a team that has an underrated decor. Like you said, TVR is a guy that's underrated as well. And I think with the acquisitions that they've made and kind of just the fact that they're on limited cap space at the moment, this is a team that's going to have to ride with this defense. But what's interesting is that they can still add some pieces. I still think I know that they don't have the cap space at the moment, but during the season and stuff, they're going to gain cap space and whatever. And obviously with Backstrom being on LTIR, it's going to allow them to, make a little bit of moves and leeway over here. So I think they can add maybe one more defenseman. Obviously there's a defenseman that's still available. I don't know if you're aware. But
no, we're not asking it because it's not going to happen.
Well, no, it could happen.
It could, Chris.
It actually could happen because this makes realistic sense. But I think a guy, and I do genuinely believe this, a guy like PK Subban could make sense for a team like the Washington Capitals. And I'm not trying to make that like. I know we asked that question to every guest that was here.
Almost every guest.
But I'm being like completely honest here. Like I look at the Caps team and I look at kind of what they're missing. And I think a guy like PK Subban on a 1-2-year deal at $2 million, $3 million for kind of what he brings, that big body, heavy defenseman, kind of like what Zdeno Chara was a couple of years ago. I think Subban can be that hard hitting, top 4, top 6 defenseman that can, help the Caps out a little bit this season. So I would say, do you see that potentially as a possibility, maybe going into this season that, there's an opportunity that they don't necessarily address the defense in the sense of PK Subban, but maybe add a defenseman before the season starts.
It's really funny because I wrote on this exactly like a couple days ago. I'm like, man, you guys are spot on. Like reading Washington Hockey Now. Look at that. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, honestly, you do make a good point. I mean, and I wrote about kind of the same thing is, you had a similar circumstance with Chara, right? Where they needed a left-hand guy going into the season. They had just lost Brendan Dillon. They lost, man, my mind is blanking right now. They lost another left-hand guy, and they needed somebody to come in and fill that void. And I think that with Chara, they were like, oh, this guy has such a good history. He's a good locker room guy. He's a good presence. Let's sign him. And they signed him for cheap. It was a 1-year deal, low-risk deal. Let's bring him in, see what he does. And you could technically do the same with PK because, we have a few weeks to go to training camp and he doesn't have a deal yet. And there's a lot you can do with him. He's a right-hand defenseman. They don't have too much depth right now on that right side. All the guys that they bought in this season are left-hand shots. And you can say all you want, okay, they can just move over to the right side if they have to. It is not that easy. TVR had to do it, but he has played both sides before, and he was luckily very good at doing it. It is not easy to do to switch sides like that. Everything changes. It's hard, right? So I think that a right-handed defenseman, especially a veteran one who, like you said, I mean, he's a hard-hitting guy. He can move the puck. Laviolette likes that in his system. He likes defensemen who move the puck. And I think Subban, would be a good option. Will it happen? I'm not sure. There's, again, not a lot of space really to work with if you look at the LTIR and the players who are going to come back. Because they're already facing a crunch when Wilson eventually comes back. And if Hags comes back, you're in a crunch where you got to make a move. So I'm not positive. And they're also high on Iorio, who I think if there was a right-handed problem, they could just make a call up. So I think that it's possible. Is it likely? I'm not sure. I don't know.
And that's what I was going to next. My next point, which is, on the right hand, they have Brett Johnson eventually in the long term. That's eventually I see being on the Capitals roster. You have Ryan Chesley, who's a right-handed defenseman, and then Vincent Iorio. If he cannot crack the Washington Capitals lineup, by training camp, or even if they give him a couple games in the season to start off, and he can't, withhold a position, maybe they look elsewhere in the market, UFA market, or maybe in terms of a trade. But in the long term, the right hand, side is perfect. I also look at, Alexander Alexiev on the left side, who I think, could get a potential call up during the season, playing with the Hershey Bears on the left side if there's any injuries. But in terms of, center depth, if the center depth doesn't work that they have right now, there's two guys that, I'm looking at very closely that could make the jump, which is Alexi Protas and also Hendrix Lapierre. And what are your thoughts on those two guys potentially maybe making the jump to the NHL?
I really like both of those players a lot. We saw glimpses of them, more so Protas last year at the NHL level, and both of them bring, a lot. Protas, he's a very coachable player. He'll do exactly what you want him to do. He can use his speed. He's gotten so much better at skating. He's a big body, and he can, get to those puck battles. He can be aggressive on the forecheck, and he can fit with a lot of different guys. He got those top 6 minutes last year. He showed he can slot in at center. There's a lot of different things that he brings, and his skill set is so good and getting to the point of a full-time NHLer that I'm very excited to see what he brings to the table. As for Lapierre, I also think that he's absolutely excellent. I think that he's a hard worker. He has great speed. He has good hands. He's becoming more confident in that shot, but he's a fantastic playmaker. And I think that when you look at his training camp last year, he absolutely deserved that spot that he earned. He was excellent. He was moving his feet. He was putting up points in the preseason. He was showing consistency, professionalism, good movement with the puck, maturity in his game, and something that he's worked on over the last season. I think he looked good in the queue with the Titan. I think that he really improved with a lot of different areas of his positioning, of his play in his own end, of his two-way awareness. I think that there's a lot to look forward to, and I'm expecting another strong camp from him. He came in development camp. He looked good there. He's going to come into, training camp, and he's going to do the same exact thing. So I think both those players, I wouldn't be surprised, at all to see them get NHL minutes and make the most out of them this season.
And at this year's draft, which we attended, the Capitals did something that I think it was not really surprising because we know their love for Russians. With their 20th overall pick, they selected a guy who at one point was a top 10 prospect, but, due to his health, dropped in the rankings. And I could not pronounce this guy's last name, so I'm going to let Luca do the honors.
Ivan Miroslachenko.
There you go. So what are your thoughts on that, essentially, on that selection at 20th overall?
I think it's an absolute slam dunk of a pick. They did an absolutely phenomenal job. I think Miroslachenko, he brings, a lot to the lineup. He can put the puck in the net. He's he reminds me a lot of Ovi, and, looking ahead to the future, you see a top 10 prospect, like you said. I mean, it was a Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosis and, a missed season that led to that drop in stock, and teams being like, maybe not, we're not going to risk it. He'll be back, and he'll be on fire. I think that the Caps looked at the medical report. They were very thorough. They said multiple times. They had Jason Service look over everything. They made sure that, his medical tests were clear, and he can play with a lot of speed. He makes the right plays. He's a dynamic player. He has a wicked shot. He knows where to go to score. I mean, Caps fans are gonna absolutely love him. He does need to honor his KHL deal, so he's going to finish that, kind of like the Kuznetsov situation, and then come over here. And I think with that growth and that time over there, he'll get to evolve, develop his game against men, and get that taste of the pro level, and then come to North America, pick up on everything you learned over there, and bring it to the table. So I think they made a slam dunk of a pick.
And we all know, they have Russian ties with a lot of players. So when that selection was made, we're like, holy crap, we totally forgot about that guy. And we're like, yeah, now it makes sense because he's Russian. And probably Ovechkin had a lot of say in that selection as well. Give the kid a chance. Fellow Russian, I'll take him under my wing the last couple of seasons I have with the Capitals until I retire. So I mean, I think it was a steal of a draft pick.
When we were at the draft, I was sitting next to Chris, and I was telling him when the Caps picked him at 20th overall. Me and Chris both looked at each other and said, "That's going to be a steal in a few years, right?" And
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we both knew that we're like this is the perfect. I had predicted it before the draft started. I'm like, if he does fall, he probably ends up in Washington because of the Russian connection as well, and just because I think it would be a Washington thing to do. And then as it was getting closer and they picked him, I'm like, this guy's a steal. Like he should have gone potentially top 5, top 7. Right, but because of his disease, they obviously pushed him back a little bit more. And I think the Caps got themselves a hell of a player. And if he does pan out into what he's projected to be, then yeah, you've kind of got yourself not necessarily Ovechkin's replacement, but close to it to some degree, right? And so I think it was a good move for them. Obviously it's a risky move because you don't know how well he's going to come back from his injury. You don't know if he's going to still be the same player that he was before. But it's a risk that was worth taking, especially with the Caps and their success with drafting Russian-born players in the past. It definitely made a lot of sense. I know that Chris. I want to hear Chris's opinion, but I know that he also thought that it was a steal when they drafted him too.
yeah. Well, I mean, we had him pretty high on our list.
Yeah.
We ignored the health issues. We just went on pure base talent, right? I don't know where I had him on my list. I think I have him 9th or 8th.
Yeah, it was
Or
probably
maybe
I
even a
think
bit lower. Actually, I know I had him at top 15.
Had him in my top 15.
Yeah, I think I
Yeah.
had him in my top 15 too.
And so there was actually, I think it was a Capitals fan behind us. He complained about the pick, and then we turned around and we're like, "What are you talking about?" we were
Yeah.
like, okay, I get his point because with the health issue and the risk, but I think he's in remission now. I think everything
Yeah.
is all good. So, I mean, and like Sammy mentioned, he's gonna be in the KHL. Developing when he comes, he's gonna be. I think he's gonna be a really good player.
Yeah.
Ovechkin comparisons. I mean, we'll see.
It's very hard to beat that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's,
that's
it's a
exactly
little
right.
a little too soon, but he's gonna be a 30 goal scorer if all pans out, even higher maybe.
Like getting Chelsea, who had potential to be first round pick, and then him as well. I thought they had one of the better drafts in terms of teams. And you know, with that being said, we have two more questions, which is, who do you think is going to be the breakout player for the Washington Capitals heading into the season? Mine is someone that mentioned in the comments, which is Anthony Manta. I think in the last 4 seasons, he hasn't played more than like 43 games, if I'm not mistaken, 45 games. And, they did have that blockbuster deal that came out of nowhere, essentially, where, they traded Rana to Detroit, and, Manta came back. And people, the Washington Capital fans, including my cousin, who's a diehard Washington Capitals fan, were not pleased with the deal whatsoever. We do know Rana wasn't working out. He was being a healthy scratch a couple of times. But, Manta's health has been a huge concern with his time in Detroit and also at Washington. And, I think this year, if he's healthy, he has the potential. He's always had the potential to be a top 6 forward. And I think this year we're going to be able to see that if he's healthy.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean that's definitely my breakout player too. I mean, he's somebody who, I mean, like you said, he has such an upside as the top 6 player. We haven't seen the best of him yet. He came in it was strange in the shortened 2020-21 because you got him for what, like a month? You didn't really get to see the best of him. And then this year he got off to a good start. And then you have a devastating injury and you have, surgery, and you have few months, that you're missing him, and he comes back, still looks good. There's consistency that needs to be found, but when you're still adjusting and you're coming back from a shoulder injury, it's not going to be easy to just, get on pace. When he's healthy, he's somebody who can make a lot of noise, and I think that this year there's not really a choice too much for okay, he'll either be a top 6 guy or he'll drop. He's going to be a top 6 guy. There's just not the flexibility on the roster to really, have him not live up to that potential. And I think he wants to live up to that potential. And if he's healthy, he can do all the right things. I think he'll look good with a guy like Strome or whoever they end up putting there. But, I see a lot from him this season. I really do.
What about you guys?
Mine. She just mentioned it before. I think mine's Dylan Strome, and I'm gonna say that because I think he breaks out in the sense that I think we're gonna finally see the Dylan Strome that I think everybody expects him to be. Like I said, he finished the year strong in Chicago last year, especially after trade deadline and obviously where he was. I think he was almost a point a game player or just above that as well. So he had done really really well towards the second half of the season. And I think this is a guy that's got a lot to prove, right? He makes $3.5 million. I think he's a guy that like I mentioned before, if he's given top 6 minutes and with the right line mates, he can definitely break out. So I think my breakout player has to be Dylan Strome. I'm high on him, and I liked him. I wanted Montreal to sign him when he became available, but he's a guy that I think for
And he cut
sure
out.
definitely could.
Okay. And Chris, who's your player to be breakout star?
I'm gonna go with Conor Brown. I mean, listen, he's gonna be playing on the first line with Alex Ovechkin and Kuznetsov. I think he's gonna have a career year. I mean, it's a no-brainer. You're playing with Alex Ovechkin, you're playing with Kuznetsov, you're gonna get some points.
I
So,
like that one.
and he's very underrated. So, you know.
And
And for the Dylan Strom, Luca, I completely disagree. I'm willing to shave my head if he gets over 65 points, and you can shave it. Okay, that's how.
I'm not saying
that's
over
how
65
certain-
points. I'm just
Okay,
saying
well,
I think he's gonna be better than a lot of people give him credit for. And I think that I'm not gonna go out and say that he's gonna be a point a game player. I don't think he will be, but he's a guy that 50, 60 points could be doable with the right line mates. That's what I'm trying to say.
and what if all three of our picks, well, four of our picks, well, two of them are the same, all have career years? I guess we're all right at that point.
Then the
it's
Caps are going to be
possible.
making the playoffs, and we'll be talking about them fighting for a Stanley Cup. That's just what it's
And in terms of playoffs, that's our last question before we end today's episode, which is, we saw how strong the Atlantic and the Metropolitan got this year. So the overall East is going to be very competitive. Are the Washington Capitals, minus Hagelin, minus Wilson for a couple months, and minus Backstrom for the whole year, still contenders despite their additions?
I think so. I think that there's a lot. It's so strange because there are some Caps fans who they'll like tweet me. It's also strange. Like it'll be like 12 o'clock at night and I'll get like a notification that like somebody replied to my tweet and they're gonna be like, this season is gonna be terrible. And I'm like, first of all, like I'm asleep. Second of all, like did you I'm like, are you asking a question, dude? I'm like, but no, I mean, I love talking to everybody. It's such a good community. So I just want to shout out, fans and all that stuff right now. I love talking to them, but I think that there's a lot to be positive about. I think that you have two new goaltenders. You have a very good goaltender in Kemper. You look at his playoff numbers, he was dealing with an eye injury all at the same time. That's not something that's just easy, especially if you're a goalie to come back and be like, oh, yeah, I'm completely fine. No. Like, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
he'll get, he's gotten, hopefully feels better over the summer, but he has consistency. He's a big body. He can stop those pucks. So that problem right there with the inconsistent goaltending, you had two young goalies and neither of them are bad goalies. It's just the need for consistency. And Simon McCullen said at the end of the season was like, we didn't have more time to wait with them. And I think it rings true, right? I mean, the window's closing. You don't have a lot of time to wait. So bringing in two new goaltenders definitely helps. The defense, I personally love that top four. I think if they just play, like they did last year and step it up a little bit and, Farivar is going to come in, have a good sophomore season, and Jensen hopefully continue to build off last year. I think that you're going to have a good decor. And then I think Strome also has a good year. I think that we're going to see more from him. I think that a change of scenery is going to be a huge help. And under Laviolette, I think he'll really, bolster his game. Conor Brown, I think, is going to do excellent. And this is a team that has to step up. And, with Ovechkin at the helm, and he wants to win another cup. He wants that record, but he wants another cup. So that will alone, they listen to him. So I think through those first couple months, they're gonna miss Wilson, but the train isn't gonna fall apart. They still have pieces. It's not like they lose Tom Wilson, they don't have anybody left ever. Like they still have the pieces, and then when Wilson comes back, all the better. And Backstrom will be missed, but hopefully he's around the rink. Hopefully he's skating again, trying, you know what I mean? So just his presence alone, just having that, off the ice is huge. So I expect good things. I don't understand the negativity. I'm not a very negative person. I think we gotta be positive. This is a team too that, considering their past couple seasons, and last year was an injury fire at the start of the year where like half the roster was like Hershey Bears and they were still doing very, very, very well. I don't think that's a crash and burn season. I personally don't think so.
And there's a lot of like people saying that Senators got better, the Devils, the Red Wings, but the thing is that it all comes down to chemistry. If their
Columbus.
goaltending doesn't pan out, even though they made additions in that area, and even the forwards and the defensemen that they brought into those teams, you know okay, well, maybe there's a chance they don't make the playoffs, but the core is still the same for the Washington Capitals. The team is still intact. Yes, they lost two big players, but one of them will be back uh, you know, after a quarter of the season. Backstrom, we shall see. Hagelin, yes, he's a very good player, but in my opinion, they do have the pieces to replace him. So we shall see what happens with that. I think they're going to be a wild card team again. And I think Ovechkin's still going to have a fantastic season. The Capitals have a lot to look forward to. The addition of Conor Brown, hopefully having Dylan Strome, pan out and find his game consistently. A healthy Anthony Manta as well. The team is still good in my opinion when I look at it. Well, how about you guys?
Yeah,
Do you want to go
Chris.
first? You want me to go first? All
Yeah,
right.
go first off, Lucy.
I see them potentially, missing the playoffs. I don't want to be the, the
The-
guy who
Party
brings
pooper.
the negative news. But I mean, listen, they finished at 100 points last year. I think they got the last spot, if I'm not mistaken.
They were in a
Uh,
wild card spot, yeah.
yeah.
well, so and now, like you mentioned, Red Wings, the Senators, the Columbus Blue Jackets, the Devils, the Flyers, are arguably a better team too. And we're still waiting on Lou making some moves in New York. Who knows what the hell's going on there? But it's gonna be tough. And I mean, listen, out of the teams that I see potentially falling out of playoff spots would be the Bruins and the Capitals, and even arguably Pittsburgh, if it doesn't work out next season as well. Like those are the kind of the three teams where they were good in their prime, but now that they're kind of like aging, and yeah, it's kind of the same core, but at some point there's other teams that are willing to pass them. I mean, listen, they got better goaltending, but with Backstrom missing, Wilson for half the year, those are two big pieces, and I think they're gonna have to win a lot of game towards the end of the year on those guys. If they potentially come back
So
to
you're
make up
choosing
for.
youth essentially over
Yeah, yeah,
aging veterans basically. So
yeah. I
the
mean, yeah, you
older
have
teams.
Ovechkin, but it's not a one guy. It's not a one player sport, right? The whole team needs to perform. So
Yeah, and you still have Stigi Oshie, you still have Kuznetsov, who found this game again after all that stuff that went on. But Pittsburgh, they did get a lot older by adding a guy like Jeff Petrie, bringing back Letang, bringing back Malkin. Let's be honest here, it's not the same Malkin that we saw in the past. Prime Malkin, he's way past his prime. He's slower, he's older. Letang, he's still putting up fantastic numbers in terms of a defenseman at his age. Petrie, can he have a bounce back year with Pittsburgh? And I know like people are gonna love this, but I do think it comes down to Pittsburgh or Washington fighting for a wild card spot. Pittsburgh does have a good team, but they are older. Washington, they got a little bit younger, but their prospect pool is better. Somehow they were able to stay competitive, but also add prospects that could be NHL players. And like we mentioned, Chelsea, uh, um, oh my god, I forgot his name.
Miroslachenko.
Yes, that's another one. We also have Lapierre, uh, Patros as well. All those names that we mentioned before. Those guys could be fighting for NHL spots. As when you look at Pittsburgh, for example, they don't have that same luxury essentially. So, in terms of like the future and short term, I do think Washington is a better team than
I'm I'm
Pittsburgh.
just gonna end it here real quick. I've always learned one thing when it comes to making predictions, especially when it comes about the Caps and the Penguins, and that's to never bet against Sidney Crosby or Alex Ovechkin. And so I'm not going to bet against Alex Ovechkin this time either. I do think the Caps make the playoffs. I look at the Metro, And yes, New Jersey's improved. Yes, Columbus has improved. And I think Pittsburgh obviously hasn't really gotten worse or better. But I think if you look at where they're at, I think the Caps are a wild card team. They're a team that might finish third in the division. But Alex Ovechkin, if he scores 50 goals again this year, the Caps are in. And that's the harsh reality of it. Whether Penguins fans are watching this or not, or whoever is, the Caps, if Alex Ovechkin is scoring 40 to 50 goals again this year, he's there. They're there, and like Red Flow said, the Caps look like another wild card year. But if they get in, they got a chance, and I do believe that. I don't try to bet against Alex Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby, because every single time I've tried, they've proven me wrong. So, and I know it's not a one-man team, but in this case, Alex Ovechkin's been a big part of Washington's success for so many years that, at this point, it's like, okay, when Washington's there and Ovechkin's still in the team, you don't bet against them, and that's it. So I'm gonna go with yes, they're gonna make the playoffs.
And we said that so many times. This is it. They're too old. Oh, these injuries happened. Pittsburgh, they're done, and they always prove us wrong, because there's always that those players that always step up and in the presence of people that are injured, and once those players come back from injury, they're always successful. But I don't know if you guys have anything else to add before we conclude.
Nope.
Well, with that being said, we would like to thank Sammy for coming on. You guys could check out her work on Twitter, and we wish you good luck this upcoming season. Hopefully, it's not disastrous in terms of injuries and like Backstrom banter. Oh my God, this team, they're useless without them. Hopefully, everything goes as planned. The goalie tandem works out. Strome obviously has a bounce back year. Manta is healthy. Maybe we see Backstrom back for the playoffs. That would be nice. But let's be optimistic, like Sammy was saying. She's a very optimistic person. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. And don't forget to like, subscribe to our channel, and send this to any Washington Capitals fan that may be interested, or anyone that loves the subject of hockey. So thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode of the Young Guns Podcast.